Well, I think it's time for a really interesting story about one of the most famous tales from ancient times, David and Goliath. So, with this new House of David show coming out, I thought it might be fun to tell you what the original story was actually all about. And to be honest, it's kind of different than what most of us think. By the way, I upload videos every week. So, if you enjoy this kind of content, feel free to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you won't miss a thing. So, you know that whole famous story about David and Goliath, right? The little guy with a slingshot takes down the giant warrior. Classic underdog story. Well, turns out that story may have been a little, embellished over the years. Now, before you say I am crazy, let me explain. See, the version we all know today mostly comes from modern Bibles, which follow something called the Masoretic text. This version says Goliath was 6 cubits and a span tall, which translates to about 9 feet 9 inches. That's like bigger than Shaq. But here's where it gets interesting. If you look at an older version of the story, like the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation from the 3rd century BCE, or even some ancient cuneiform scrolls, they say Goliath was 4 cubits and a span. That's about 6'9". So, you see, instead of being some fantasy-level giant, he was probably just a really tall dude. You know, like your friend who can never find pants that fit. And here's the thing. David? He might not have even been the one who unalived Goliath. Yeah, I know, shocking. In 2 Samuel 21:19, the Bible actually says that a guy named Elhanan, one of David's soldiers, was the one who took out Goliath. So what probably happened? Well, over time, as David became this legendary king, people started tweaking the story, swapping out Elhanan for David, because, let's be real, it made for a better tale. It's kind of like when your uncle tells you about that one time he went fishing, and every time he retells the story, the fish gets bigger and bigger. At first, it was just a regular trout, but now? Oh, now it was the size of a great white shark. David's story kind of worked the same way. Over time, he became like a King Arthur-type figure, absorbing different legends that were originally about other people. People wanted their king to be the ultimate hero, so they started sticking more and more epic moments onto his story. So, yeah, when you're watching this new House of David show, just remember, you're not exactly watching history. You're watching a really, really old piece of royal propaganda that's been turned into modern propaganda. So, you see, back in ancient times, history wasn't written the way we think of it today. There were no historians sitting around fact-checking sources, making sure every detail was accurate. Nope. Back then, storytelling was more like a game of telephone. One person tells the story, then another person retells it, making it a little more dramatic and so on. By the time you get to the final version, it's like, whoa, that's way different from how it started. Now, let's talk about the texts themselves. Most Bibles today follow something called the Masoretic text. This version was finalized by Jewish scholars called the Masoretes, around 700 to 1000 CE. But here's the thing. By the time they locked in their version, the story of David and Goliath had already been retold for over 1,000 years. So, naturally, it had gotten some, let's say, enhancements. The older version, the Septuagint, is a Greek translation of Hebrew scriptures made around the 3rd century BCE. This version actually has a shorter David and Goliath story. And more importantly, it gives Goliath's height as 4 cubits and a span, which is about 6'9", not 9'9". Now that's not the only place where things get weird. So in 2 Samuel 21:19, there's a verse that straight up says, Elhanan son of Jair unalived Goliath the Gittite. Wait, what? Elhanan? Who's this guy? What happened to David? Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Scholars think that Elhanan was actually the original giant slayer. But somewhere along the way, scribes either miscopied the text or intentionally changed it to credit David instead. And there's more evidence of this in 1 Chronicles 20 verse 5, where the same story is retold. But this time, it says Elhanan unalived the brother of Goliath, not Goliath himself. You see what's happening here? The scribes were like, oh no, we can't have 2 different guys unaliving Goliath. That would be confusing. So they tweaked it, adding the brother of to make it fit the David version of the story. So, why would they change the story? Why did David get credit for something he probably didn't do? Simple. It's because of politics and propaganda. Back in ancient Israel, kings weren't just rulers. They had to prove they were chosen by God. And what better way to do that than by making your king the ultimate underdog hero? Think about it. David was already known as a great warrior and king. But imagine if people started saying, Hey, remember that Elhanan guy? He unalived Goliath, not David. That would not look good for David's legend. So over time, scribes and storytellers started shifting the credit from Elhanan to David. It made the king look stronger, and it made the people love him more. It's like if someone went back and edited Michael Jordan's career highlights to say he won 11 championships instead of 6. It didn't really happen, but man, it sure makes the legend even bigger. And let's be real, this kind of thing happens all the time in history. The more a story is told, the more it grows. That's probably how Goliath went from 6'9" to 9'9" over time. It's the same way movies today always exaggerate the villain. You know how Darth Vader seems way scarier in Star Wars than he actually is when you break it down? Dude lost a fight to Obi-Wan, got outsmarted by his own son, and literally got thrown by an old man. But still, in our minds, Vader is the ultimate bad guy. That's what happened with Goliath. At first, he was just a strong, tall warrior. But then, over time, storytellers were like, you know what? He wasn't just big, he was a freaking giant. He wasn't just strong, he was unstoppable. And David? He wasn't just good, he was the ultimate hero. And that's how the story got bigger, badder, and more dramatic. So, at the end of the day, what does all this mean? Goliath was probably just a really tall guy, not a 9-foot monster. David probably didn't unalive him. It was actually a dude named Elhanan. Over time, the story got changed to make David look more heroic. This happens all the time in history, because people love a good underdog story. So next time you hear someone talk about David versus Goliath, just smile and think, ah yes, the greatest case of historical clickbait. So, we already know Goliath was probably just a tall dude and that David might not have even been the one to unalive him. But now, let's break down what kind of warrior Goliath actually was, what kind of weapons he had, and, this is the juicy part, why he probably never stood a chance against David in the first place. Yeah, you heard that right. Even if David was the one who fought Goliath, the whole underdog thing is kind of misleading. Who was Goliath? So Goliath wasn't just some random tall guy. He was a Philistine warrior from Gath, one of the 5 major Philistine cities. Now, the Philistines? These guys were bad news for Israel. They were a seafaring people, originally from places like Greece or Crete, and they had advanced military tech that Israel didn't have. To put it in modern terms, the Israelites were running around with swords and spears, while the Philistines had iron weapons, better armor, and battle experience. It's like showing up to a gunfight with a baseball bat. Now, Goliath was described as wearing a bronze helmet, very expensive, very heavy, a coat of scale armor weighing 125 pounds, roughly the weight of a full-grown golden retriever but strapped to your chest, leg armor, which wasn't common back then, a huge spear with an iron tip weighing 15 pounds. Now that spear, that thing was insane. Most warriors used spears with bronze tips because iron was expensive, but Goliath had an iron-tipped spear, which was like bringing an F-35 fighter jet to a sword fight. This dude wasn't just strong, he was equipped like a tank. But here's the thing. So, Goliath walks out to the battlefield, covered in armor, carrying a massive sword and spear, expecting a hand-to-hand fight. He's thinking, I'll smash whoever comes at me. But David, he doesn't walk up with a sword, he brings a sling. Now, I know what you're thinking. A sling? Like a kid's toy? Well, let me tell you something. Ancient slings were serious weapons. In fact, slingers were some of the deadliest soldiers in ancient armies. A trained slinger could hit a target 200 yards away, launch a stone at 100 miles per hour, crack a skull on impact. And the stones they used? These weren't little pebbles. In the Valley of Elah, where this battle supposedly happened, archaeologists have found tennis ball-sized stones, which means David was basically throwing a bullet at Goliath's head. So when David slung that rock, he wasn't lucky. He was a sniper. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Now, remember how we talked about Goliath being really tall? Well, some historians think that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't just a big guy. He might have had a medical condition called acromegaly. Acromegaly is caused by a tumor on the pituitary gland, which makes people grow really tall. Think of NBA players like Yao Ming or Andre the Giant. But here's the catch. People with acromegaly often have poor eyesight because the tumor presses on the optic nerve, slow movement, Because their joints are messed up. Bad reflexes. So if Goliath had this condition, it would explain why he needed an attendant to guide him into battle. His vision was bad. Why he wanted David to come closer. He couldn't see him well from a distance. Why he didn't dodge the rock. His reflexes were slow. Basically, David didn't just beat Goliath. Goliath never stood a chance. This is like watching a heavyweight boxer get challenged by a professional sniper. The boxer might be stronger, but if the sniper shoots from 100 yards away, that fight is over before it even begins. David knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't a weak little kid hoping for a miracle. He was a highly skilled slinger who probably trained for this kind of fight his whole life. So when that rock hit Goliath in the forehead, that wasn't luck. That was calculated precision. So what's the real story? What actually happened? Well, here's the best guess based on ancient texts, archaeology, and history. There was a real battle between the Israelites and the Philistines. A big Philistine warrior, maybe named Goliath, got unalived. The original story says Elhanan unalived him. Later, scribes changed the story to make David the hero. Over time, Goliath got bigger, and David got more heroic. By the time the story reached us, we got the ultimate underdog tale. And honestly, that's kinda awesome. Because even though the story got exaggerated, it worked. People loved the idea of the little guy defeating the giant. And that's why the story of David and Goliath has lasted over 3,000 years. It's not about the facts, it's about the message. And now, every time someone says, it's a real David versus Goliath situation, you can smile and tell the real story. Well, that's about it for today. Until next time, take care.